594. What I would also like to point out is that all of this deeply esoteric work should only take place under the guidance of an experienced mentor. It is trite to the aspirant that, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Then he sits comfortably and waits or focuses his attention in an attempt to attract the attention of some master, deciding that he is ready and good enough. Of course, from time to time he feels an impulse and rushes in a spiritual direction, frantically taking on the work of discipline and purification. However, a steady, lasting, unshakable effort on the part of an aspirant is really rare. In fact, it is so that at the right moment the teacher appears, but this right moment depends on the fulfillment of certain conditions initiated by the aspirant himself. When the process of purification has become a habit of life, when the aspirant has learned to concentrate consciousness in the head of his own free will, when the light shines in the head and the centers are active, then the teacher takes the person into his hands. Until then, a person can have a vision of the teacher or see the thought form of the teacher, receiving a lot of real benefit and inspiration from such contact with the reflected reality, but this is not a teacher, and this is no evidence of the stage of apprenticeship accepted. Through the light of the soul can be known. Therefore, seek the light of your own soul and know that the soul is your guide. When contact with the soul is established, your own soul, so to speak, will introduce you to your teacher. With all due respect, I want to add that Master is not at all eager to get to know you. In the world of souls, your and his souls are connected with each other and feel an essential unity. However, in the world of human affairs and in the process of great work, it should be remembered that when the Master takes an aspirant into his group of disciples, that aspirant is for a long time a burden and often a hindrance in service. Students often overestimate themselves, although they do not admit it. Subjectively they really like themselves and are often puzzled why the great ones do not give them any sign, do not show their concern for them. They will not, and they do not need to do this, until the aspirant applies to the full the knowledge received from the lesser mentors, from the books and published scriptures of the world. Students should go about their immediate responsibilities and prepare their machinery for serving the world. They better refuse to waste time in search of the teacher. They must achieve mastery where their weak point is now. And then in a life of service and struggle they can reach a state of such complete self-denial and selflessness that the teacher will not encounter obstacles approaching them. Students should go about their immediate responsibilities and prepare their machinery for serving the world. They better refuse to waste time in search of the teacher. They must achieve mastery where their weak point is now. And then in a life of service and struggle they can reach a state of such complete self-denial and selflessness that the teacher will not encounter obstacles approaching them. Students should go about their immediate responsibilities and prepare their machinery for serving the world. They better refuse to waste time in search of the teacher. They must achieve mastery where their weak point is now. And then in a life of service and struggle they can reach a state of such complete self-denial and selflessness that the teacher will not encounter obstacles approaching them. 595. From the above, it is obvious that I have no right to give special instructions for awakening the centers and burning the etheric partitions in order to release energy. Such information is too dangerous and too intriguing to be put into the hands of the general public, which is driven by the desire for something new and which does not have sufficient balance and the necessary mental development. However, the time has come when the fact of the existence of the energy body underlying the nervous system must be recognized throughout the world, when the nature of the 7 centers, their structure and location must be technically assimilated, and when the laws of their opening must become widely known. But it is not yet possible to report more. It is unsafe. Center science is too complex to be widely disseminated. The training in each case and the methods used depend on too many factors for general rules and instructions to be given. It is necessary to take into account the ray and type of person, his gender and point of evolution, as well as balance centers. By this I mean taking into account their overdevelopment in one case and underdevelopment in another, the presence of dominance of forces under or over the diaphragm and whether the main energy is concentrated in the center of synthesis and redistribution, the solar plexus. The quality and brightness of the light in the head should be studied, since this is an indicator of the degree of control of the soul and the degree of purity of the vehicles, various etheric partitions must be carefully considered. And the vibration velocities of partitions and centers must be compared. Synchronization has to be achieved, and this is the most difficult thing. These are just a few considerations that a mentor must consider. Therefore, it is obvious that only a mentor who has achieved synthetic vision and is able to see the whole person, such as he is in reality, can give instructions. 596. A student finds such a mentor when, under the guidance of his soul, he achieved success in his life, assimilated the theory of the science of centers and mastered his astral nature, took it under control along with its corresponding center, the solar plexus. The emphasis that Christianity places on the lordship of the Christ principle has laid a solid foundation for the work needed. This truth is curiously supported by the teaching of the number 8 in relation to the centers, which we are told is the number of Christ. There are 8 centers if the spleen is included. All of them are formed by overlapping 8s. The center at the base of the spine has 4 petals formed from 2 8s. The fact is that in our time and in the Anglo-Saxon spelling, the number 8 represents the basic symbol of all centers, because the shape of the petals actually resembles many superimposed 8s. The name petal is conditional, and the center is depicted in the following ways. Circle first, O, then 2 touching circles, forming 8. Then, as the number of petals increases, we simply observe the increase of these double circles, superimposed on each other at different angles, until we come to the image of the 1,000-petaled lotus in the head. 597. Ultimately, the centers have a dual function. They demonstrate the form-building aspect of divinity and, through their activity, bring the outer form into manifestation. Then, towards the end of the evolutionary cycle, both in the macrocosm and in the microcosm, they give expression to soul power and life and condition the incarnation of the fully manifested Son of God, possessing all the faculties and knowledge of deity. Rule 15. The lights approach the shadow, but do not burn it. The fiery shell has been created. Let the magician sing the words that will fuse fire and water. 601. Esoteric perception. We begin to consider the last rule of magic. Looking back at the long series of instructions, some of the baselines of the teachings stand out extremely clearly, leaving less significant directions in the shadows. Students should remember that there is a specific procedure to follow when reading any basic textbook, and these instructions are considered to be: first of all, the student must read the entire textbook in order to grasp the points of primary importance, the main lines of teaching and the 3 or 4 points on which its entire structure is based. Having comprehended them, he can begin to search and think over the auxiliary information that helps to illuminate and clarify the main provisions. After which he can successfully delve into the details. Therefore, it will be interesting for students to revise these instructions and highlight the main points from them. Then they can begin to assimilate secondary information and finally comprehend all the particulars stated under various subheadings. This is how the outline of the book will be drawn up, which will reliably fix the knowledge contained in it in the student's memory. One of the main aspects of the teaching, which is most clearly revealed in all truly esoteric instructions, concerns the position student of the occult. He intends to deal with things subjective and esoteric. He set himself the goal of becoming a worker of white magic. For this, he must accept and steadily maintain the position of the observer, the researcher, removed from the mechanism of observation and contact. He must recognize himself as a spiritual entity, which differs in nature, tasks and methods of work from the bodies that he considers necessary to temporarily occupy and use. He must be aware of his unity and feel the lines of contact with all such workers and, thereby, find out his position in the spiritual hierarchy of beings. So much misinformation has spread and so often the wrong emphasis has been placed on status and position in the so-called hierarchy of souls that sane, balanced students are now trying to direct their thoughts to something else. They try to avoid, as much as possible, any speculation about ranks and areas of activity. However, when leveling the pendulum, you can swing too far in the opposite direction and completely stop taking these stages of activity into account. Don't get me wrong, I do not advocate sorting people and assessing where they stand on the evolutionary ladder. This has been done in the stupidest way in the past, which has shamed the topic and greatly discredited it in the minds of the public. Where they stand on the evolutionary ladder. This has been done in the stupidest way in the past, which has shamed the topic and greatly discredited it in the minds of the public. Where they stand on the evolutionary ladder. This has been done in the stupidest way in the past, which has shamed the topic and greatly discredited it in the minds of the public. 602. If we sensibly consider the names of these stages, seeing in them what they really are, designations of the levels of the state of expanded consciousness and degrees of responsibility, then the danger of a personal reaction to the terms accepted student, initiate, adept, teacher will be negligible and many misunderstandings can be avoided. It should always be remembered that individual status is usually not disclosed, and that the point of evolution, which can be safely recognized as the leading point in the evolution of the average citizen, is demonstrated by a life of active selfless service based on an enlightened vision ahead of racial understanding. At the present time, when forming a new group of world servers in the world, one must be truly prudent. Each employee is responsible for himself and his ministry and for no one else. It is necessary to evaluate and determine the evolutionary status not on the basis of claims, but on the basis of the work done by a person and the manifestation of love and wisdom by him. The judgment must be based on the demonstration of valid knowledge of the plan, realized in the wise formulation of the next step ahead of the human race, on the demonstrated esoteric perception, on the broad constructive and inclusive influence, or the power of the aura. 603. You are asking for a clearer definition of what I mean by esoteric perception. I mean the ability to live and function subjectively, to maintain constant inner contact with the soul and with the world in which it lives. Such subjective contact must be revealed through actively manifested love, through the relentlessly poured wisdom, through the ability to contain everything and identify with everything that breathes and feels, this outstanding characteristic of all correctly functioning sons of God. I also mean that internally held attentive state of mind that allows you to focus at will on any plane. This state is able to condition and control the emotional sensitivity of not only the student himself, but also everyone with whom he may come in contact. By the power of his silent thought, he is able to bring light and peace to everyone. Thanks to this mental power, he is able to tune into world thoughts and the sphere of ideas. He is able to understand them and choose those mental methods of influence, those concepts that will allow him, as a worker of the plan, to influence his environment and clothe new ideals in such mental matter, which will contribute to their rapid recognition in the world of Philistine everyday thinking and existence. Such a state of mind will also enable the student to orient himself towards the world of souls, so that in this high place of inspiration and light, he can recognize those with whom he must work, communicate with them and, in unity with them, cooperate in the implementation of divine intentions. Thanks to this mental power, he is able to tune into world thoughts and the sphere of ideas. He is able to understand them and choose those mental methods of influence, those concepts that will allow him, as a worker of the plan, to influence his environment and clothe new ideals in such mental matter, which will contribute to their rapid recognition in the world of Philistine everyday thinking and existence. Such a state of mind will also enable the student to orient himself towards the world of souls, so that in this high place of inspiration and light, he can recognize those with whom he must work, communicate with them and, in unity with them, cooperate in the implementation of divine intentions. Thanks to this mental power, he is able to tune into world thoughts and the sphere of ideas. He is able to understand them and choose those mental methods of influence, those concepts that will allow him, as a worker of the plan, to influence his environment and clothe new ideals in such mental matter, which will contribute to their rapid recognition in the world of Philistine everyday thinking and existence. Such a state of mind will also enable the student to orient himself towards the world of souls, so that in this high place of inspiration and light, he can recognize those with whom he must work, communicate with them and, in unity with them, cooperate in the implementation of divine intentions. which will allow him, as an employee of the plan, to influence his environment and clothe new ideals in such a mental matter that will facilitate their rapid recognition in the world of Philistine everyday thinking and existence. Such a state of mind will also enable the student to orient himself towards the world of souls, so that in this high place of inspiration and light, he can recognize those with whom he must work, communicate with them and, in unity with them, cooperate in the implementation of divine intentions, which will allow him, as an employee of the plan, to influence his environment and clothe new ideals in such a mental matter that will facilitate their rapid recognition in the world of Philistine everyday thinking and existence. Such a state of mind will also enable the student to orient himself towards the world of souls, so that in this high place of inspiration and light, he can recognize those with whom he must work, communicate with them and, in unity with them, cooperate in the implementation of divine intentions. Esoteric perception is the main thing that aspirants need to acquire in the current period of world history. Until aspirants at least partially achieve it and are not able to apply it, they will not form part of the new group, they will not be able to work as white magicians, and these instructions will remain for them theoretical and, mainly, speculative, instead of being practical and effective. 604. In order to cultivate this inner esoteric perception, meditation is necessary, with regular meditation in the early stages of development. However, over time, as a person grows spiritually, his daily meditation gradually gives way to a stable spiritual orientation, and then meditation in the form in which it is now understood and required is no longer needed. The alienation of a person from the forms he uses becomes so complete that he always lives in the place of the observer, and from this point and in this state controls the activity of the mind and emotions, as well as the energies that make physical expression possible and useful. The first stage in the development and cultivation of esoteric perception is to learn to maintain a state of continuous detached observation from the outside. The new group of world servers, its outer ranks, may well be regarded as a core of experienced, trained researchers. I would divide this group into 3 subgroups so that aspirants and cellists all over the world can establish which subgroup they belong to and can sincerely, honestly, and with understanding begin to do the work needed. In this way, they can be helped to define their role. First, there are trained researchers. These aspirants learn 2 things. First, they learn to practice that detachment, which they acquire as souls in the world of everyday affairs, and understand the real meaning of the words, work without attachment. Second, they are involved in world affairs in one or the other of the 7 areas of activity that I mentioned earlier when I brought the new group to the world's attention. They study the signs of the times. They explore the great drama of history in order to discover its underlying tendency and tell the traditional academic world and thinkers of the race about what they see and understand. 605. Throughout human history, intertwining, 3 threads run, and the study of the interactions of these 3 threads reveals the history of evolution. By directing thoughts to the study of the first strand, one can examine the development of the formal aspect, racial tendencies, and discover how flawlessly the forms of races, countries, flora and fauna of our planetary life have met the needs of the slowly evolving sons of God. Mentally following the second thread, we come to an understanding of how consciousness grows. We study how the transition from the instinctive stage to the stage of intellectual awareness takes place, and then to that intuitive enlightenment, the achievement of which is the current goal of expanding consciousness. The third thread concerns the implementation of the plan itself, and here we enter into a truly unknown realm. What is the plan and what is the goal is not fully realized by anyone, except for the highest adepts and the most exalted sons of God. Unless people have an enlightened mind and develop the ability to respond intuitively, it will be impossible for them to comprehend the basic concepts contained in the mind of God Himself. Until the highest point of the Mount of Initiation is reached, it is impossible to see the promised land as it is. Until the limitations, the necessary limitations, of the 3 worlds are overcome, and until a person begins to function as a free soul in the spiritual realm, that which is higher than this realm must remain hidden from the person. Just as the human state of existence and awareness remains a sealed book for the animal. However, Researchers studying times and periods can make rapid progress in intuitive growth if they persist in meditating, develop their intelligence, and try to always think in universal terms. Let them view historical retrospective as part of preparing for the future. May they muster the courage to acknowledge the fact that the kingdom of souls is inevitably becoming a phenomenon of the physical plane. Am I speaking paradoxically? And that it will eventually become known as the fifth kingdom of nature and will be recognized as such by scientists over the next century. These trained explorers form the outer circle of the new group, and their keynote is synthesis, getting rid of all non-essential and promoting the enlightenment of humanity. Working in many areas of human activity. 606. The second subset of the new group of world servers are the telepathic messengers. There are much fewer of them, and they are characterized by relatively close interaction with each other. They are primarily a connecting group. They stand out from the more exoteric circle of trained researchers, but have a wider range of ministry as they work in a more esoteric manner. They are in contact with each other and with trained researchers, but at the same time they are in contact with a group of men and women working at the very center, or heart, of the world group. They have a threefold, very difficult job. They tirelessly have to cultivate that detachment that is inherent in the soul, which has known itself. They tirelessly adapt knowledge and information to the needs of the world, which they then pass on to trained researchers and deliver teachings. They work efficiently, but always because of the stage, and while the world may initially be aware of them at this early stage of the new group's work, although they may be recognized as mentors, writers, and ministers, later they will farther and farther into the background and work through the outer circle of the new group. They will inspire trained researchers, place increasing responsibilities on them. They will contribute to the growth of telepathic interaction in the world, weaving those threads that, in the end, will bridge the current gap between the visible and the invisible and make possible the emergence of a new world, a world in which death, as we know it, will not exist and universal continuity will be established consciousness. This is why the emphasis is on increasing the telepathic sensitivity of the members of this subgroup within the new group. 607. Their task is extremely difficult, much more difficult than that of the first group, more difficult even than that of the latter, since they still lack certain abilities and experience. Their center of consciousness is intuition, not synthesizing intelligence, and their state of awareness is broad and inclusive. Therefore, they experience more suffering than others, and only a few of them are not very concerned about their own well-being and are not overly sensitive to vibrations emanating from forms in all three worlds. The state of detachment in most of them is still imperfect. They connect and so they are drawn into countless problems and respond to the suffering of the world. They see, so to speak, too much, since they do not yet have the privilege of clearly seeing the goal for 2 centuries ahead. They feel an urgent need. They are responsive to a new influx of spiritual power. They carry on their shoulders the burden of the problems of humanity, and since they are more or less coordinated, they live in 3 worlds at the same time, and few people can do it. They are aware of the urgency of the present auspicious moment and, seeing the inertia of many, they are forced to work with colossal tension. 608. The third and most intimate group of all are the members of the hierarchy itself. I absolutely do not care if these liberated souls are called the elder brothers of the race, teachers of wisdom, the cloud of witnesses, Christ with his church, Superman, or any other terms conditioned by inherited tendencies or tradition. They themselves are even more indifferent to it. Minor misunderstandings about their identities, names, and status are irrelevant. They are the intelligent forces of the planet. Through their expanded state of consciousness, they express the mind of God. They embody an immutable, unchanging rational principle, and through them flows the energy that we, for lack of a better understanding, call the will of God. They know much more about the plan than the 2 outer circles of the new group of world servers, for they clearly see the next step, to which planetary evolution will lead the race over the next 2 centuries. They don't bother to speculate about what the ultimate goal is at the end of the world period. This may surprise you, given the endless speculation of the uninitiated. But it is so. They know that there is a time and a period for everything, looking ahead and intuitively comprehending the goals of all kingdoms for the near future. They direct all their combined efforts towards one thing, to the development of the intuitive telepathic receptivity of the messengers, connecting the gap between them and the physical world. The messengers, in turn, try to use the explorers. Knowers, messengers, and researchers, they all work in close, although sometimes unconscious unity. All respond, in accordance with their level, to the impulses of the mind and will of the Logos. 609. Behind this triple group are thrones, dominions, and authorities, which we will not touch upon. On the other side is humanity, torn apart by the horrors of the past world war, bewildered by the social, religious, and economic oppression of the present, sensitive and responsive to the influences and energies that herald the new age, the age of Aquarius. Unable to understand and explain anything and longing only for freedom of thought and acceptable physical conditions, grasping at every opportunity to gain knowledge and therefore providing fertile ground for the work of the new group. We have made sure that the purpose of any inner training is to develop esoteric receptivity, to gain that inner sensitive awareness that allows a person to function not only as the Son of God in physical embodiment, but also as someone who also has the continuity of consciousness, which makes it possible to be internally awakened and at the same time externally active. This is accomplished through the development of the ability to be an experienced, trained investigator. I address these words to all aspirants. It is the ability to maintain the state of correct perception that contributes to the achievement of a state of detachment from the form and the resulting acquisition of the ability to use the form at will, with the goal of promoting hierarchical plans and thereby bringing benefit to humanity. Upon achieving the ability to perceive correctly, the aspirant moves into an intermediate group of experienced messengers, connecting the aforementioned groups, a group of spiritual workers on the subjective plane with an exoteric group, interpreting each other's actions. Remember that even members of the hierarchy listen to the opinion and advice of those disinterested disciples who can be trusted to correctly recognize and interpret the needs of the moment. 610. When this stage has been reached and the person consciously comes into contact with the plan, then you can start real magical work. Men and women who begin to live as souls can take on the magical work of the new age. They can open an era of such changes and restructuring that will lead to the emergence of a new heaven and a new earth, as all the scriptures of the world eloquently testify to. Then it will be possible to work with forces in etheric matter and create on the physical plane such creations and organizations that will more adequately embody the life of God in the age of Aquarius, which is now with us. It is to this stage that Rule 15 applies. This rule describes the completion of magical work. It is equally true of the magical workings of the solar logos, the planetary logos, the incarnating soul, or an advanced person who has learned to work as a white magician according to the plan of the Great White Lodge. It, of course, also applies to the work of those who, through intellectual development, have learned to work as a magician, but on the so-called black side, since the same rules of magic work apply to both groups, although their motivating impulses are different. However, we have nothing to do with the work of black magicians. What they are doing has a powerful short-term effect, if we use the word short-term in the sense of cyclical, but in due time they will lose this power and submit to the requirements of the carriers of light and life. The shadow stage is a hazy, indefinite period that precedes dense concrete manifestation. We are not talking here about the shadow as a double of the soul and physical embodiment. This is one of the intermediate stages of the creative process. It is technically called the nebula increase and decrease stage, and this stage precedes the emergence of a more stable, relatively static exoteric form. In the formation of the solar system, it represents a preparatory period, and examples of how it proceeds can be observed in the starry sky. This is the stage when the great magician is still at the beginning of the process of performing his work. He has not yet finally sang those mystical words, those spiritual sounds that will begin to precipitate and lead to the tangible appearance of form. 611. The secret doctrine speaks of 3 fires known from antiquity. The Vishnu Purana gives these fires exactly the same names as HPB, who borrowed these terms from ancient scripture. Electric fire, solar fire, and fire of friction, when they combine, give birth to the manifested macrocosm and microcosm. This combination is spoken of in my previous treatise on cosmic fire. These fires esoterically represent one fire. But this fire produces, when perceived by consciousness, which itself goes through different stages of evolutionary development, the impression of a differentiated fiery essence. This fiery essence can be perceived as life itself, or as self-luminous light, or it can be perceived as an active form inherent in a single substance that underlies all phenomena. In this last rule of magic, the fires in question are the fires of matter itself, which approach the shadow end, as the ancient commentary symbolically expresses it, ascend from the second darkness at the call of the spirit of light and meet at the appointed place that which will absorb them and raise them to the fiery point from where these fires of living light and radiant life came out. Getting rid of the great illusion. The phrase from Rule 15, that will fuse fire and water, refers to the effect that occurs at the point of condensation after the great words that cause this effect have been uttered. This rule is almost impossible to explain, and I am not allowed to tell you the words that trigger this process. Only a few hints can be given that will induce the real aspirant to think and, alas, can only irritate the superficial intellectual seeking easy quick methods and formulas of work. Heat and moisture are involved in the formation of all forms of life, but the great mystery, essentially the last mystery that is explained to the adept, is how the union of the three fires is capable of producing moisture, or the element of water. This problem, this phenomenon, forms the basis of the great illusion, which is spoken of in the ancient books. This conjunction gives rise to the veil of Maya. In reality, there is no such object as water, the water sphere, the astral plane. This is, if you could only realize, an illusory effect that has no real existence. But, in time and space and for the perceiving consciousness, he is more real than what he hides. I cannot put it more clearly in words. One can only suggest to the thinking student that the light of his soul, reflected in his mind, and the energy of form, expressed in his etheric body, in this sphere of temporal duality are for him two of his basic realities. The aquatic nature of his astral experience, in which, apparently, again an illusion, notice, both of these aspects of divinity meet and operate, is only a fascinating phenomenon and in the occult sense is not based on fact. Any sincere aspirant knows that his spiritual progress is measured by the degree of his freedom from this illusion and entry into the pure atmosphere and clear light of his spiritual consciousness. According to its consciousness, the animal kingdom works with the second of both basic realities. For the animal, the life of the etheric body and the power that governs animal or material nature is the basic expression of truth. At the same time, the animal begins to vaguely feel the world of illusion and has some psychic abilities and feelings, with the help of which it recognizes, but is not yet able to interpret the astral plane. The veil of illusion begins to fall before the eyes of the animal, only it does not yet know it. The human being has wandered in the world of illusion for centuries, since this world is his own creation. In this case, the person, in turn, from the point of view of consciousness, he comes into contact with both realities and gradually learns to dispel the illusion due to the steady growth of the radiance of the radiant light of the soul. I dare to remind you that duality is only a stage on the evolutionary arc that ultimately leads to the realization of unity. 612. The veil of illusion is reminiscent of the moment before sunrise, when the world of familiar things is seen through the fog, the haze that obscures the shape of the world and the rising sun. Then comes that calm, that mysterious, foggy period when the real is hidden by the unreal. Everything plunges into that strange, distorted state, when the forms are not seen as they really are, they lose their outlines, color and perspective. Real vision is then impossible. Therefore, the astral stage, the gigantic cycle of time, when the great illusion reigns, can, on the basis of the outline symbolic approach, be considered only temporary, transitory. It is not a stage of concrete divine manifestation. It is not a stage of pure, undistort awareness. It is not a stage of perfect work. This is the period when the demigods walk on the earth. This is the time when the truth is only vaguely felt, when the vision is vague and accidental. This is the stage of the semi-conscious plan, and when you work with partial knowledge, it is certainly accompanied by difficulties and mistakes. It is also a stage of distortion and continuous change, while in reality we have an endless play of forces acting blindly and seemingly aimlessly. As for humanity, this is the time when a person is shrouded in mist and fog, lost in the miasms rising from the surface of the earth, a symbol of the basic nature of the animal kingdom. Yet at times, when the dawning light of spiritual consciousness breaks through the enveloping darkness, this stage seems unreal. This is the interval between the dominance of animal consciousness and the dominance of spiritual consciousness, and this interval of astral illusion is characteristic only of the human family. There is no astral plane. 614. I am desperate that I cannot explain myself more clearly. How can one who is subject to the illusions of the senses, like all human beings, comprehend the state of consciousness of those who have freed themselves from the illusions of the astral plane? Or realize what is the state of awareness of those forms of life that have not yet developed astral consciousness? It is the dual nature of the mind that causes this illusion, since the mind of a person gives him the keys to the kingdom of heaven or locks the front door to the world of spiritual realities in front of him. A mind that concretizes, not based on spiritual principles, causes all the troubles of humanity. This sense of self and the separative individualism inherent in such a mind has brought humanity to its present state, and yet even this is part of a great process of development. It is the awareness of duality. But the same illusion ultimately reveals to man the secret password to the kingdom of God and contributes to his liberation. Maya herself brings him to truth and knowledge. It is on the astral plane that the heresy of isolation must be overcome. It is on the field of Kurukshetra that the individual aspirant Arjuna and the cosmic Arjuna learn the lesson that the knower and the knowable are one. The secret science of the teacher of wisdom reveals the secret of how to dispel the fogs and veils, darkness and gloom generated by the connection of fires in the early stages. The secret of the teacher is the revelation that there is no astral plane. As a result, the astral plane is found to be a figment of the imagination, created by the uncontrolled use of creative imagination and the misuse of magical powers. The work of the hierarchy consists primarily in to do away with shadows and dissipate moisture. The goal of the masters is to let in the light of the soul and show that spirit and matter are two realities that make up one whole, and that only in time and space. And also due to the cyclical misuse of magical and psychic abilities, the astral plane of the great illusion appeared and has now become so real, which is, in a certain sense, more real, for man, than the kingdom of light and the kingdom of form. In one most interesting sense, this is true, since the human being is a soul and since the light of the soul is within him and gradually grows in radiance, then this very fact gives rise to an illusion. Because of this illusion, magical work often progresses in the wrong directions, is based on the wrong motives, and flows into a pattern. All the power of the world illusion is directed against any beginner's attempts at white magic. 615. So, the rules end with the statement that the magician chants the words that will fuse fire and water, but these rules are intended for aspirants. Similar rules for initiates end with the words, let the initiate sound a note that will unite the fires. These are important, very promising words for a beginner in magical work. Out of necessity, he is still working on the astral plane and will be forced to do so for a long time to come. A sign of its growth is the stable removal of consciousness from this plane and the achievement of mental balance and mental awareness, after which creative work on the mental plane becomes possible. There is one interesting ancient message found in the archives of the adepts that describes some of the stages of magical work, set out, of course, in symbolic form. 616. Let the magician stand in the middle of the great world sea. Let him plunge into the water and stand there on his firmament. Let him look down into the depths of the water. Not a single regular shape is visible. There is nothing but water. It flows under his feet, around him and over his head. He cannot speak, he cannot see. Truth disappears into the water. Let the magician get into the stream. There is water around him. His feet stand firmly on the ground and the rock, but all the forms he sees are lost in the grey boundlessness of the fog. The water reaches his neck, however. Standing with his feet on a stone and keeping his head in the air, he makes progress. Everything is still distorted. He knows what is worth, but he does not know where to go and how to go, does not understand. He utters the words of magic, but muffled, indistinct, in vain. The fog returns them to him, the true note is not heard. Around him, many sounds of many forms absorb his sound. Let the magician stand in the water mist, freeing himself from the running stream. Faint outlines appear. He sees a small segment of the path. Light flickers through clouds of mist and haze. He hears his own voice, which sounds clearer and more correct. He sees the forms of other pilgrims. Behind him is the sea. There is a stream underfoot. Fog and haze all around. No sky or sun is visible overhead. Let the magician stand on a higher firmament, but in the rain. Drops run down it, thunder rumbles, lightning flashes in the sky. But the rain, flowing down, disperses the fog, washes the form, clears the atmosphere. Thus, forms become visible and sounds are heard, although still faintly, for deafening thunder and booming sound of falling rain. However, the sky is already visible, the sun is breaking through, and in the breaks of the floating clouds the blue of the sky caresses the tired gaze of the student. Let the magician stand at the top of the mountain. Beneath it, in valleys and plains, water, streams, and clouds are visible. Above him, the heavenly blue, the radiance of the rising sun, the purity of the mountain air. Every sound is distinct. Silence speaks with sound. 617. Then there are important phrases that describe the final picture. Let the magician stand inside the sun and look at the globe from there. From this high point of serene peace, let him utter the words that will create forms, build worlds and universes and give him life to what he created. May he direct the forms created on the top of the mountain in such a way that they can break through the clouds that cover the globe and bring light and power that will dispel the veil of forms that hides the true earthly dwelling from the eye of the beholder. This is the end of the magical work. This implies the discovery that the astral plane and the so-called astral light are just cinematography, created by the person himself. And what man has created, he can destroy. I have no right to report any more about magical work at the present time. The words that connect cannot be given under any circumstances, but only under an oath of secrecy, which automatically determines the behavior of the student. Such vows are not given to any person, but are made by the aspirant to his own soul after the soul has communicated the word to him. He discovers them for himself as a result of tireless efforts and striving. He knows that these formulas are the prerogative of all souls and can only be recognized and safely used by those who have realized the self as one. He then vows never to reveal these words to anyone who is not yet functioning as a soul and wanders blindly in the valley of illusion. On the basis of such an automatic response of those who know the race to knowledge, the hierarchy of adepts is recruiting its own cadres. Call to service. In concluding my treatise on the magical work of the individual aspirant, I try to show 2 points. The immediate goal of learners in our century and to summarize the steps they need to take. Conditions that need to be eradicated, overcome, and the punishment that subjects and students are subjected to when they commit mistakes and misconduct. First of all, the immediate goal must be realized if you want to avoid wasted efforts and make real progress. Many well-intentioned aspirants tend to spend too much time introspection and making plans for service. The aspiration of the world is now so strong, and humanity is now so oriented towards the path, that everywhere receptive people are drawn into the whirlwind of spiritual desire and ardently yearn for liberation, spiritual revelation, and the acquisition of soul consciousness. The belief that everyone has latent opportunities is now so deep that people often overestimate their level of development. They waste a lot of time portraying themselves as ideal mystics or suffering from a lack of quick spiritual attainments or from failures in the ministry. So, on the one hand, they get lost in the uncertain, the vague realms of beautiful idealism, colorful hypotheses, and delightful theories. On the other hand, They begin to pose as the center of power in the field of fruitful service. Their thoughts are directed to the development of plans for some world project, where they see themselves as the axis around which this ministry will revolve. They often try to accomplish these designs and base, for example, an organization on the physical plane that is potentially useful but equally potentially useless if not dangerous. They fail to understand that their motivating impulse is primarily determined by what the Hindu mentors call the sense of the self, and that their work is based on a subjective selfishness that must and will be eradicated before real service is possible. Colorful hypotheses and delightful theories, on the other hand, they begin to pose as the center of power in the field of fruitful service. Their thoughts are directed to the development of plans for some world project, where they see themselves as the axis around which this ministry will revolve. They often try to accomplish these designs and base, for example, an organization on the physical plane that is potentially useful but equally potentially useless if not dangerous. They fail to understand that their motivating impulse is primarily determined by what the Hindu mentors call the sense of the self, and that their work is based on a subjective selfishness that must and will be eradicated before real service is possible. Colorful hypotheses and delightful theories, on the other hand, they begin to pose as the center of power in the field of fruitful service. Their thoughts are directed to the development of plans for some world project, where they see themselves as the axis around which this ministry will revolve. They often try to accomplish these designs and base, for example, an organization on the physical plane that is potentially useful but equally potentially useless if not dangerous. They fail to understand that their motivating impulse is primarily determined by what the Hindu mentors call the sense of the self, and that their work is based on a subjective selfishness that must and will be eradicated before real service is possible. They begin to pose as the center of power in the field of fruitful service. Their thoughts are directed to the development of plans for some world project, where they see themselves as the axis around which this ministry will revolve. They often try to accomplish these designs and base, for example, an organization on the physical plane that is potentially useful but equally potentially useless if not dangerous. They fail to understand that their motivating impulse is primarily determined by what the Hindu mentors call the sense of the self, and that their work is based on a subjective selfishness that must and will be eradicated before real service is possible. They begin to pose as the center of power in the field of fruitful service. Their thoughts are directed to the development of plans for some world project, where they see themselves as the axis around which this ministry will revolve. They often try to accomplish these designs and base, for example, an organization on the physical plane that is potentially useful but equally potentially useless if not dangerous. They fail to understand that their motivating impulse is primarily determined by what the Hindu mentors call the sense of the self, and that their work is based on a subjective selfishness that must and will be eradicated before real service is possible. They often try to accomplish these designs and base, for example, an organization on the physical plane that is potentially useful but equally potentially useless if not dangerous. They fail to understand that their motivating impulse is primarily determined by what the Hindu mentors call the sense of the self, and that their work is based on a subjective selfishness that must and will be eradicated before real service is possible. They often try to accomplish these designs and base, for example, an organization on the physical plane that is potentially useful but equally potentially useless if not dangerous. They fail to understand that their motivating impulse is primarily determined by what the Hindu mentors call the sense of the self, and that their work is based on a subjective selfishness that must and will be eradicated before real service is possible. 619. The tendency towards aspiration and service is right and good and must be seen as a fact of the affirming universal consciousness and the property of the race as a whole. It is becoming more evident thanks to the growing influence of Aquarius, which, since about 1640 AD, is gaining power and has two results. It destroys the crystallized old forms of the Piscean age and stimulates creativity and the desire to express them in group concepts and group plans. As everyone is well aware, this is the cause of the present troubling circumstances. These circumstances are due to processes that can be described in 3 words: depersonalization, when the interests of the state, group or groups are considered more important than the interests and rights of the individual; merger, that is, the tendency to connect, fuse, coordinate and achieve such interconnectedness, which should, in the end, attest to the unity of humanity and lead to the synthesis of all individuals. Which, as Browning rightly notes, is the goal of the evolutionary process and marks the end of the journey of the divine prodigal son, and the perceived connection between units, groups, and combinations of groups on both the subjective and objective sides of manifestation. These three words, depersonalization, fusion, and interconnection, reflect the outstanding phenomena taking place among us at the present time. The student is encouraged to realize the essence of the plan, which is revealed in three words, and to study how these processes are developing in the world. That they are outstanding will become evident if the student takes the trouble to survey the panorama of history. Even the history of the last 5 centuries will reveal to him the fact that formerly great individuals played an outstanding role and that history was determined mainly by the deeds of powerful individuals who fascinated their time and era. Then isolation and separation governed human affairs. Each fought for his own land. Each did not think about his brother and lived selfishly. 620. Therefore, students should ponder these three words, which will continue to grow in meaning over the next 50 years. This is much longer than it takes for average students to comprehend information and make plans. Recognizing this phase of the fulfillment of the divine purpose, it would be useful for them to examine their own life manifestations and ask themselves the following questions. Are they wasting time in mystical daydreaming or busy with the practical application of felt spiritual truths, thereby making them part of their daily experience? Do they find that their reaction to the increasing depersonalization of the century is resentment, or do they believe that this relatively new state of detachment from the personality contributes to the solution of their own personality problems? Do they register an expanding ability to sense the thoughts and ideas of other people? Do they feel that they are becoming more receptive and therefore more able to integrate into the great process of forging connection? How strongly does the tendency to pretend to be significant manifest itself in their daily life? Do they see themselves as the center of a universe that automatically revolves around them, or are they working to stop focusing on themselves and blend in with the whole? 621. These and other similar questions help to reveal the degree of responsiveness of the aspirant to the coming of the new age. In this treatise on individual development and the establishment of control over the astral body, the necessary instructions were given for the growth of understanding and as a guide to action for the intermediate period between the two great ages, Pisces and Aquarius. Part of the underlying design has been put into words, a design that is recognized by many people around the world and is embodied in almost every area of human life. It is subconsciously registered and intuitively implemented by many who are not yet aware of the technical details of the plan. Those leading the human race are not primarily concerned with successfully creating new conditions. These conditions are already fully secured, and the growth of human understanding and spiritual awareness of the oneness of everything cannot be stopped. The problem is, what means to continue to use to achieve the desired goals so that the nature of the form can be tuned and prepared to fulfill its new responsibilities, to operate with its new knowledge without unnecessary suffering, morbid mental states and hours of torment, which often attract more attention than the gradual successful growth of the divine awareness. The world invariably maintains a tendency towards synthesis and understanding. Invariably less is poured into more and the unit is united with the whole. Invariably great universal concepts affect the minds of the masses, after which misfortune, cataclysm, destruction of form and everything that prevents the transformation of these concepts into facts occurs. Physical plane. Therefore, the task of hierarchical workers is to prevent suffering and support a person, while the tidal wave of spiritual opening spreads over the world and does its job. Hence the call to service, which blows a trumpet in the ears of all empathetic disciples. 622. As a rule, there is a response to a call to service, but this response is colored by the personality of the aspirant, saturated with his pride, his ambition. The need is really felt. The desire to help a world in need is real and sincere, striving to serve and to lift is true. Steps are taken by the aspirants which, in accordance with his design, enable him to advance the plan. However, the difficulty that we, on the inside, have to face is that, although there is no doubt about the willingness of people to serve, their characters and temperaments become almost insurmountable obstacles. We have to work through such aspirants, and they sometimes give us a lot of trouble. These hindering qualities often do not manifest until a person begins his ministry. That they are, the observing presenters may assume, but even they have no right to miss an opportunity. When such qualities are subsequently manifested, the tragedy is aggravated by the fact that often, in addition to the aspirant himself, many others suffer along with him. When such a person tries to start a ministry, getting out of idealistic utopias, beautiful-minded plans, chatter and organizational edge, many respond to the note he utters and gather around him. When his secret weaknesses emerge, the environment suffers with him. The method of the great ones is to find those who are already able to respond to some extent, and then work through them. But this method is fraught with some dangers. Beginning 623. His whole nature is overstimulated due to his inner contacts and the influence of the spiritual forces with which he comes in contact. This poses a real danger, since he hardly knows how to behave yet, and rarely realizes the attendant risks. The people he works with, in turn, present a problem for him. Their flattery, admiration, criticism, and greed generate a cloud of thought forms that envelopes his path. Since he is not yet sufficiently detached and spiritually advanced, he wanders in confusion in this cloud, without realizing it. So he goes astray and departs from his original intention, again without realizing it. His latent weaknesses are bound to show up under the pressure of work, and it is inevitable that he shows signs of breakdown from time to time, if I have the right to use that word. Personality deficiencies become more pronounced as he tries to fulfill his particular type of service to the world. I mean service for the sake of one's own growth, determined by personal ambition and love of power, even if it is only partially realized or not realized at all. The student, of course, is always in tension and, just like lifting a heavy load uphill, experiences overstrain crises and may not cope with the loss of strength or lower his ideal for the sake of his weaknesses. 624. To all this should be added the tension of the current period itself and the general depressing state of humanity. These factors subconsciously affect all disciples and aspirants working in the world today. Some of them show signs of physical overstrain, although their inner life remains balanced and normal, healthy, and properly oriented. Others break down emotionally, with two consequences depending on the point of development of the aspirant for service. He either learns detachment due to the tension he experiences, and it is curious enough that this can be called the defense mechanism of the soul in the current period of world opening, or he becomes more and more nervous and close to becoming a neurasthenic. Some people feel overstrained in the mental body. They often feel confused about this and lose the light of truth. As a result, they work without inspiration, only because they know it is right, and also because they are involved in the rhythm of the work. Others try to realize an opportunity in accordance only with their understanding, and for this they begin to stubbornly defend their innocence. This is the most characteristic defect of people of the mental type. Build a structure around their service and construct a form that actually embodies only what they want, what is considered the only correct, but which divides. She is a child of their mind, not their soul. Some, more powerful and coordinated, feel the pressure of their whole personality. Their sensitive psychic nature responds to both need and the theory of the plan. They are aware of their truly valuable qualities, know that they have something to give. However, they are still so subject to what is called personality that the ideal of their service gradually and invariably descends to the level of this personality and, as a result, is colored by their personal reactions, their likes and dislikes, their individual life inclinations and habits. All these habits, in the end, are fixed, and then we have an employee who tries to do a good job, but spoils everything with his unconscious isolation and individualistic methods. This means that such an employee gathers around him only those whom he can subordinate and whom he can lead. His group is colored not by the impulses of the New Age, but by the sharing instincts of the worker at the center. The danger here is so subtle that the student needs to be very vigilant in introspection. It is so easy to be captivated by the beauty of your own ideals and your own vision, the conviction of the correctness of your own position. 625. But if you cultivate real impersonality, if you develop the ability to stand firm, if you resolve any situation in the spirit of love, refrain from hasty actions and not allow isolation, the result will be the growth of a group of true servants. The search and unification of those who are able to materialize the plan and contribute to the birth of the new age, with accompanying miracles. It takes the rarest courage to do this. Fear keeps the world in bondage, and no one is free from its impact. The aspirant and the disciple are characterized by two kinds of fears which should be especially well studied. The fears described earlier in the treatise, and the fears inherent, as you know, to existence itself, are familiar to us all. They are rooted in an instinctive nature: economic fears, fears caused by the sexual instinct, physical fear and terror, fear of the unknown, along with the prevailing fear of death, poisoning so many lives, and are the subject of much psychological research. I will not disassemble them. They are overcome by the life of the soul as it begins to embrace and transform daily life, and are also overcome by the refusal of the seeker to succumb to them in any manifestation. The first method helps to strengthen the character and prevents the emergence of new fears. There is no place for them if the soul consciously controls life and all its situations. The second neutralizes the old thought forms and leads, ultimately, to their destruction due to the lack of nourishment. This is how a double process proceeds, initiating the manifestation of the true qualities of a spiritual person and more freeing him from the slavery of ancient frightening concepts. The student finds himself steadily moving away from the main governing instincts that have hitherto associated him with the general pattern of elemental planetary life. It should be noted here that all basic instincts are rooted in this specific quality of planetary life, fear, prompting for any action. As you know, psychologists have 5 main dominant instincts. We will briefly discuss them. 626. The instinct for self-preservation is rooted in the innate fear of death. Due to the presence of this fear, the race has reached its present longevity and immunity. Life sciences, modern medical knowledge, all the advances of civilization that provide a level of hygiene and comfort, all have evolved as a consequence of this fear. Everything is aimed at the survival of the individual, at the prolongation of his existence. Humanity survives as a race and as a kingdom of nature, thanks to this fear and this instinctive reaction of the human unit, the desire for self-preservation. The sexual instinct is mainly due to the fear of separation and isolation, rebellion against isolation on the physical plane, against loneliness. Due to this fear, the race develops, perfects and multiplies the forms through which the race can manifest. 627. The herd instinct is easily explained by such a reaction. To gain a sense of confidence, reliable, guaranteed security, based on a large crowd of their own kind, people have always sought communication, gathered together for protection and economic stability. The result of this instinctive reaction of the race as a whole is our entire modern civilization. As a result of fear, its gigantic centers, huge cities, densely populated neighborhoods have arisen, and we live in a modern herd, raised to the nth degree. The fourth great instinct is the instinct of self-affirmation, also based on fear. It comes from the fear of the individual that he will not gain recognition, as a result of which he will be deprived of much that could belong to him. Thus, in the course of time, the egoism of the race grew, a sense of acquisitiveness and the ability to seize, the will to power in one form or another, developed, and today there is a strong individualism and self-confidence, a sense of self-importance, which gave rise to many modern economic and national problems. We cultivated self-determination, self-affirmation, and self-interest, and now we are faced with an almost insoluble difficulty. But from all this a lot of good has arisen and will arise, because no individual is of any value until he has acquired value for himself, in order to then unconditionally sacrifice the acquired values for the good of the whole. The instinct of inquiry, in turn, is based on the fear of the unknown, but from this fear, as a result of centuries of research, our modern education, cultural traditions, and the entire structure of scientific research arose. These fear-based tendencies have served, since man is divine, a colossal stimulator of the unfolding of his entire nature and brought him forward to his current level of broad understanding and usefulness. They led to our modern civilization with all its faults, but also with all manifestations of divinity. From these instincts that have developed to the limit and as a result of their transmutation into higher correspondences, the flower of the unfolding soul will bloom magnificently. I would like to point out the following. 628. The instinct for self-preservation finds its culmination in gaining confidence in immortality, and the work of spiritualists and psychic researchers over the centuries is the way to achieve this confidence, guaranteeing its acquisition. The sexual instinct ultimately finds its logical conclusion in the desire to achieve a conscious connection between soul and body. This is the keynote of mysticism and religion, and today, as always, it is an expression of the law of attraction, first prompting for union on the physical plane, and then finding its completion, for a person, in a consciously sublime union between a positive soul and a negative receptive form. The herd instinct finds its divine completeness in the awakened group consciousness, which today is demonstrated in the general tendency towards unity, towards all-round universal cohesion and fusion. It is expressed in the ability to think in terms of internationalism, universal concepts that will ultimately lead to universal brotherhood. The instinct of self-affirmation, in turn, gave our modern civilization its extreme individualism. The cult of personality led to the creation of standards and the veneration of heroes. As a result, it leads to the affirmation of the I, the divine inner ruler, and from our newest science of psychology there will arise the knowledge of the asserting and dominating spiritual I, which will ultimately lead to the manifestation of the kingdom of souls on earth. 629. How is the instinct of inquiry transformed? After its transmutation into divine quest, after its transformation through the application of the light of the soul in the investigated realm, humanity will move to the palace of wisdom, thus leaving behind the experience of the palace of knowledge. Our large education centers will become schools for the development of intuitive perception and spiritual awareness. Readers are encouraged to carefully study the following table. Instinct correspondence method. 1. Self-preservation immortality spiritualist research. 2. Sexual spiritual union religion unity mysticism. 3. Herd group consciousness brotherhood. 4. Self-affirmation statement I psychology. 5. Research intuition education. So, fears haunting humanity, rooted in instincts, are actually divine qualities that are misused and abused. If they are correctly understood, used, and transmuted by a knowledgeable soul, they lead to the attainment of awareness, are sources of growth and that which imparts to the dormant soul, in time and space, the necessary impulse, impetus, the desire for progress, which led a person forward. Starting from cave stage and prehistoric cycle, through a long period of history, and who today can be trusted to lead him forward with increasing speed, since he has already reached an intellectual understanding and can competently contribute to progress. Students need to realize more deeply that this whole process is divine, and that the so-called evil is just an illusion, an integral part of duality, in due time or outside of time, giving way to divine oneness. Evil is due to misperception and misinterpretation of what is perceived. Achieving true vision plus correct understanding brings liberation from instinctive reactions and induces that inner detachment that allows a person to be free in the kingdom of God. 630. But what about those two kinds of fear which have a special relation to the aspirant? What about the fear of public opinion and the fear of failure? These are two powerful factors in the life of the ministry that become obstacles for many. Those who begin to work in cooperation with the plan and internalize the meaning of service tend to fear criticism and misinterpretation of what they are doing, or they fall prey to another fear that what they do will not be liked, appreciated, and understood. They demand recognition, want to be liked, and crave praise. They measure success by the sheer size of the response. They cannot stand if their motives are misunderstood or underestimated. In such cases they violently throw themselves into explanations. They are unhappy if their methods, the composition of their group, the way they serve are criticized. They are subject to false aspirations for mass, for power, and for dogmatism. If what they do does not meet the standards or beliefs of the group of minds that surrounds them or are most attracted to them, the real disciple has a vision. He seeks to closely contact his soul in order, without losing contact, to try to make this vision a reality. He intends to pursue what, from a worldly point of view, seems impossible, knowing that the realized must be realized. Without thinking about expediency and without undue adaptation to the views of worldly practical advisors. Public opinion, the advice of those whose behavior is determined more by Pisces than Aquarius, are carefully considered, and if it becomes clear that the advice is separative, aimed at violating harmony, is not based on brotherly love and understanding, it is instantly rejected. Where there is a constant critical attitude towards other workers in the field of world service, where they pay attention only to mistakes and manifestations of selfishness. 631. I responsibly declare that in the coming cycle, only those who refuse to serve separation and watch their words will be attracted to the true work on the spiritual unification of the world in synthesis, as well as on the affirmation and recognition on earth of the fact of the brotherhood of souls. Carried evil, who has learned to see divinity in everything, who does not allow evil thoughts and does not seek out evil in others, who works with closed lips, does not interfere in the affairs of his brothers and knows how to keep what is entrusted to him, whose lives are colored with understanding and love, whose minds are distinguished by trained spiritual perception and possess the kind of spiritual awareness that appears when a keen mind is used as a conduit of a loving spirit. I want to repeat what I said in other words, since it is extremely important and the results of the impact of such people on the world are colossal. The men and women whose mission is to usher in the beginning of the new age are those who have learned the secret of silence. They are continually animated by the spirit of inclusive love. Their languages do not lead them back into the mainstream of their usual criticism. And they do not allow themselves to condemn others. They are also enlivened by a spirit of patronage. They will be entrusted with the work of establishing a new age way of life. For those who have not yet reached this point of evolution, whose vision is not so clear and whose nature is not yet so disciplined, there remains an important work at a lower level, to work together with those who are like themselves. Their traits, their qualities attract those with whom they have a lot in common. They do not work so alone, and their work has more external success, although not always. 632. Remember that any work in the eyes of the great ones is equally important. For souls in the stage at which home and place of work provide the necessary experience, these places become the field of their highest effort. Their aspiration, their diligence in doing the work, on their own level, is as high an achievement as fulfilling their mission by Christ or Napoleon. Do not forget this and try to see life in its true light, and not in its conventional differences, invented by a person and therefore dangerous. A student who does not yet possess the full vision inherent in more experienced workers, and is only beginning to study the alphabet of social work, can, with all his shortcomings and obvious blunders, do the same good deed as an older student who has more extensive knowledge and experience. Groups and preparation in the new century. For those of us on the inside, the world's workers fall into three groups. 1. The very few who are true Aquarius. Their work is fraught with real difficulties, as their vision exceeds the developmental level of the majority, and they are often faced with a lack of understanding, with condemnation from their employees and find themselves completely alone. 2. Those who are pure Pisces. They work much more easily and respond more quickly to those around them. Their work is more dogmatic, less inclusive, and tinged with a spirit of division. These include many of the world's workers in all areas of human progress and structures to improve well-being. 633. 3. Those Pisces who are advanced enough to respond to the call of Aquarius, but who still do not believe themselves enough to apply new methods of work and ideas of Aquarius. For example, in the political realm, they have a sense of internationalism, but they are not able to demonstrate it when it comes to understanding the point of view of others. They believe they have a universal consciousness, but when it comes down to it, they discriminate and suppress. They form a much smaller group than the real Pisces, do a good job, and occupy a much needed place. However, the problem they pose for the Aquarian workers trying to employ them is that while they respond to the ideal and identify themselves as part of the New Age, they don't really match it. They only catch a fraction of the vision and have learned the theory. Together, these three groups do a great deal of necessary work and, through their joint service, influence the masses of people, thereby fulfilling their dharma. One group is forced to work while still at the mercy of the obsession created by public opinion. The intermediate group has the most difficult task, because in the absence of a clear vision, the voice of their inner circle and the voice of the inner group of world knowers often come into conflict with each other, as a result of which people rush back and forth, responding to one or the other. The group of those who are most receptive to the incoming vibration of Aquarius register the voices of the leaders of both other groups, but the voice of the leading teachers and the voice of the group of world teachers unmistakably leads them forward. I am trying to explain the above methods and ways of working, as times are difficult and it is necessary to achieve clarity of mind in order to promote this work. And although such a division into groups in itself isolates and does not make it possible to present any idea in its true, synthetic form, it will already be a success if many thousands of separate groups can be attributed to the three main groups. And the student's mind is rid of the need to analyze in detail the activities of various workers implementing the plan around the world. 634. The second big test for the sensitive learner is overcoming the fear of failure. It is based on past experience, since everyone has had setbacks, on the understanding that you may not have time to fulfill the intended and miss the opportunity, as well as on an acute awareness of your individual limitations and inadequacy. This fear is often the result of a response to the current low spiritual level and diminished physical vitality of the race. Never before has the fear of failure plagued the human family so much. Another reason for this reaction is that the human race as a whole, for the first time in the history of the race, it begins to perceive vision and therefore acquires a more developed sense of relative value than ever before. People know that they are divine, and this awareness becomes universal. Hence the current turmoil and rebellion against limiting conditions. However, it will be an unnecessary waste of time for the student to reflect on their failure or fear failure. There is no such thing as failure, there can only be a waste of time. The latter is a serious factor in this time of extreme global need, but the student will inevitably someday begin to do the right thing and correct his past failures. There is no need to re-emphasize that we learn from failure, as this is a well-known truth. Everyone who tries to live as a soul knows her. The sense of time is glamorous and frustrating, while work progresses and the lesson learned from failure serves as a warning for the future. It promotes rapid growth. An honest student may succumb to a glamour, but nothing can keep him for a long time. What do a few fleeting years mean compared to a cycle of eons? Not more than a second in the line of 70 years allotted to a person. They seem to be the most important to the personality of the student. To the observing soul, they appear to be only an instant. Perhaps for the world a temporary setback may mean a delay in anticipated aid, but this, again, is only for a short time, as help comes from other sources as the plan uncontrollably moves forward. 635. Can I make you, in all seriousness, a paradoxical suggestion to work with utmost dedication and, at the same time, not take the work too seriously and not take yourself too seriously? Those who are on the inside and follow the work of the world's aspirants see at the present time their regrettable experiences of their individual inadequacy, their persistent strenuous efforts on their part to make themselves as they should be, and at the same time a depressing lack of proportion and any sense of humor. I encourage you to cultivate both of these missing qualities. Don't take yourself so seriously, and you will find yourself freeing yourself up for freer, more efficient work. Take the plan and the call to service seriously. Therefore, the immediate goal for all aspiring students at the present time can be considered the following achievements. To achieve a clear understanding of your own immediate personal problems and, first of all, the purpose of your ministry. This is done through meditation. Develop sensitivity to new impulses filling the world in our time. This is achieved through the manifestation of increasing love for everyone, and thanks to love and understanding, it is easier to contact people. Love reveals. Learn to serve with complete impartiality. It does this by eradicating personal ambition and love of power. Learn to ignore public opinion or failures. This is done due to the sensitive perception of the voice of the soul and the desire to always stay in the secret place of the Almighty. 636. We have now combined our first recommendation on the immediate goal and the steps to be taken to achieve it with our second recommendation on the behavior and factors that need to be eradicated. It remains only to enumerate the punishments to which a test subject or an experienced worker is subjected if he succumbs to glamour and his inherent flaws, allows them to interfere with his work and become a barrier between him and the perceived goal. It must be emphasized that there are three major dangers in the life of the ministry. I do not mean the individual preparation of the disciple, but his life in ministry and the activities in which he, as a worker, is involved. His temperament, his equipment, and his characteristics, physical, emotional, and mental, have a powerful effect on his environment, on the people he tries to help, on his family, on his preparation for the world, and on his speech. The first dangerous moment is his physical condition. I will not expand on this. I will only very much ask the students to act wisely, devote enough time to sleep, take the right food, which should be selected by each individual in accordance with their characteristics, and, if possible, look for an environment that would allow him to work with the greatest ease. The punishment for violating these instructions is manifested in a lack of strength to serve and in an increase in slavish dependence on the physical body. If the physical body is in poor condition, then the student finds that he is not able to take on a new volume of responsibilities imposed on him by the influx of force. 637. The second dangerous moment is the astral illusion in which all of humanity lives, its ability to fascinate even experienced workers. I have considered this issue enough in this treatise, devoted, as you know, to the methods of gaining control over the astral body and a correct understanding of the laws by following which this control can be achieved. Only mental control plus correct spiritual perception are able to break through these illusory astral miasms and reveal to a person that he is a spiritual entity in embodiment and is in contact, thanks to his mind, with the universal mind. The punishment to which a constantly obsessed student is subjected is obvious. His vision is clouded and he loses the sense of touch, as the ancient commentaries call it. He wanders along the paths of life. The third danger, most common today, is mental pride and the resulting inability to work in a group formation. The punishment for this is often temporary success and forced work with a group devoid of its best elements and consisting only of those who harbor the personality of the group leader. As a result of an emphasis on his own ideas and his own methods of work, the student discovers that his group lacks those factors and those people who would enrich it, balance his aspiration and bring into what he does those qualities that he himself lacks. This in itself is sufficient punishment to quickly revive the honest student. Leave the thinking, honest and essentially true student to be so wrong, and in due time he will become aware of the fact that the group he has assembled is sculpted by him or that he is sculpted by her, that she personifies and repeats himself. The law works quickly in the case of a true disciple, and it quickly rectifies the situation. 638. I want to assure the student that as he perseveringly moves forward, he will find that the exoteric and esoteric connection between the outer schools and the inner school, or those who know the truth, is so close that no serious student goes unnoticed. When overloaded with work, under the oppression and burden of daily labors, the knowledge that there are those who observe, and that every action based on love, every thought directed towards the common good, every disinterested reaction, is a great support. But remember that the aspirant receives the recognition of the aids when they detect an increase in vibration in him, and not as a result of an action he has committed or a thought sent. Those who teach are interested in fidelity to truth, the speed of vibration, and the quality of the light manifested. They are unaware of specific actions, words, and states. If there is tireless growth, adherence to occult principles, causing specific changes in the bodies used and an increase in the emission of light. Then this becomes known and registered, and the aspirant is rewarded by increasing his ability to serve his fellows. Teachers are not rewarded with praise, patting on the head, or verbal expressions of gratitude. They are busy making knowledgeable and teacher out of ordinary men and women. 639. Teaching them to know themselves. Freeing them from blind faith in authorities by arousing interest in their minds, a desire to investigate, and then indicating, nothing more, the direction in which to look for the answer. Creating conditions for them that force them to stand on their own 2 feet and rely on their own souls, and not on any human being, be it a beloved friend, mentor, or teacher of wisdom. I don't want to repeat myself. Most of the points concerning the work of the aspirant of our time have been dealt with earlier in this treatise. All you have to do is study them carefully. I end with an appeal to all those reading these instructions to gather strength, repeat the vows of dedication to serving humanity, subordinate their own ideas and desires to the group good, look away from themselves, again focusing on the perception of the plan. Restrain their tongues from idle talk and criticism, from gossip and slander. Read and study the necessary materials so that the work can move forward with understanding. Let class members tune into this time of urgency and opportunity to sacrifice all they have to help humanity. Necessity, need, there is. The urgency of the moment is present, and I urge everyone whom I am trying to help, to join the intense effort of the great ones. They work day and night, trying to alleviate the lot of humanity, to ward off evil and calamities that accompany the current situation. I invite you to seize the opportunity and declare that you are needed, even the smallest of you. I assure that groups of learners who work together and have a consistently deep love for each other can achieve significant results. 640. For each of you to be able to work in such a way that everyone can forget about themselves, realizing the world's need, the most sincere prayer is offered up, with the highest hope, by your brother Tibetan.